Okay, so yeah, welcome. My name is Ben Rothke. I'm a senior information security manager with Tapad. Been in the PCI space for about 12 years or so, quite a while. Currently not a QSA, but I was in a former life. So glad to be. I'll be moderating the panel. We got a lot of great questions. If you have any questions, you could ask it on Twitter, hashtag PCI Dream Team. Yeah, we've got three of the smartest minds in the PCI space. So Jeff, Coop, Dave, introduce yourself, and then we'll hit the ground running.
Jeff Hall, I write the PCI Guru blog, and I am a principal security consultant with Truvantis.
Go ahead, Dave.
My name is David Mundhenk. I'm a principal security consultant with Herjavec Group. Specialize mostly in GRC stuff and some ICS industrial control, but I've been doing PCI probably, well, been a certified QSA since 2007, and then I was involved in PCI operational security stuff before that, and before that I was a qualified payment assessor for Visa, so I've been in the payment card space for quite some time.
And I'm Mark Cooper, and I hope you're enjoying my little Elvis shtick. I thought I'd just try to give everybody a little laugh. The holidays are coming up. Yeah. Normally I do Minion stuff, but I decided to go with Elvis, baby, TCB. I've been around PCI since day one, and I still love it. And I still like to have fun and love these sessions, because between the four of us, we can hopefully get some information out there for an area that's very gray. There's a lot of, people think PCI is black and white. There's nothing black and white to it, really. It's a lot of gray, and that's what we like to try to help folks with.
Okay. I guess you could say Elvis, if there was someone does something wrong on the report of compliance, they'd be in the PCI jailhouse rock.
They'd be in the jailhouse rock, baby.
At the end of the session, at the end of the session.
Okay. One of the questions that's always coming up, and ironically, the question we can speak least about is PCI version 4. Obviously, much of it is under NDA. But Jeff, you want to give a quick, what you can say without, getting yourself in trouble?
Yeah. So this constantly keeps coming up, and so this is for all you merchants out there. If you are still storing PAN, stop, cut it out, get rid of it. With version 4, if you don't like PCI assessments today under version 3.2.1, version 4 is going to kill you. This is not a threat. This is a promise. So if you needed a reason to go out and get a P2PE solution or an end-to-end encrypted solution and tokenization, this is it. You are on the clock. You have 3 years to get that bad boy in and done, period. That's all you need to know about version 4, is the time is now to invest the money and make a change, period. End of quote. If you don't do it, you're foolish. Enough said. That's all I can say about version 4.
Get rid of the PAN. He's right. Get rid of it.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing we said numerous times is, tokenization really is, is the way to go. I mean, you see all these vendor, white papers and that talk about PCI made easy. But if you really want to make PCI easy, tokenization. And once again, this is
and that's the key, Ben, is they have to know point-to-point encryption or end-to-end encryption, whether you do a P2PE validated solution or you do VeriShield or TransArmor, which are the big end-to-end encrypted solutions. The important thing to know is They don't come with tokenization. You have to get that in addition. Just because you have P2PE or E to EE does not get you out of the PAN business. It's that tokenization piece that gets that done. And so it's important to have that piece of the puzzle with the rest of it.
Thank you, sir. One of the questions we had is, any thoughts about, PCI and Bitcoin?
Take it, Pretzel.
Yeah.
I assume I'm Pretzel, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Elvis was always known as the Pretzel.
Yeah, the Pretzel.
It's now,
TCB.
hey, Coop, it's now or never.
It's now or never. TCB, taking care of business. The thing with Bitcoin, I've got a lot of clients asking me about it. And the thing is, until the card brands monetize it to the point where there is something bolted to it that we have to protect, there's really nothing to say right now with regards to PCI and Bitcoin. It's going to be very interesting to see. If you saw the case yesterday, they declared some guy as the creator of Bitcoin, even though I thought it was this Satoshi Naoki or whatever the fellow's name was. And now this other,
right.
yeah, this fella has now said it was him, and the court said so. So now he's worth billions of Bitcoin money. And, the whole thing with Bitcoin, to me, it's like NFTs. If I can't hold it in my hand, I don't really understand the value. I guess it's the baby boomer in me coming out. So I'm going to probably get a lot of okay boomers after this. But until the thing is monetized to the point where the banks can show backing for it, it just PCI is a non sequitur for Bitcoin. So I wouldn't get too worried about it until it gets to the point where, when people say they accept Bitcoin, it's always interesting to me. Look into it a little deeper and find out what's really going on there. It's not what you think it is. So until the thing gets monetized and the payment brands come out and say, okay, this much is worth this much, and here's an account tied to this guy's Bitcoin, or however it's going to happen, and I don't have that answer. Until that happens, I don't think it's something to go down worried about and fighting about.
Okay. In 3.21, there's 35 instances of the term strong cryptography. And there is no, hard and fast definition of that. The question is, what are your thoughts on, what's strong crypto, what's not strong crypto, and how would you suggest we proceed down that avenue in approaching PCI compliance?
Well, first off, did you see that Bruce Shiner raised a big stink the other day about the term crypto and the fact that crypto is not crypto coin, crypto is cryptography.
Yes. Yes. He's the grand master. He's
Right.
one of the cryptography Bible. I actually attended a presentation he did in person, was on attack trees, believe it or not. So you essentially start, it's like the kill chain in reverse. You start with an outcome and work backwards and model all of the various possible components of the attack. And then you can use mathematical symbols for all of that, and then manipulate it and do some cool stuff, kind of like matrix algebra or something. It was fascinating. The guy is the guru for crypto. So.
Yeah. I mean, clearly his book, Applied Cryptography, is still, parts of it are dated, but it's still, the de facto reference. I mean, clearly with AES, IDEA, other accepted, peer-reviewed, government-approved, crypto standards, that's clearly in line with strong crypto. Obviously, any type of proprietary cryptography is clearly, not, to be recommended and not to be used, because, it's kind of silly. There's so much, open source crypto out there. There's no reason a company would or should do it themselves, because, history has shown every organization, everyone that tries to write, their own algorithms that are, quote unquote, better than AES, they fail miserably when that goes under peer review. Any other thoughts on with the strong crypto controls that companies should be cognizant of and be careful of?
Well, so I remember seeing a webinar a while back, maybe a year or so back, where they were talking about, as we can actually compile more and more compute power to crack some of the more stronger cryptographic algorithms, that they're going to move away from AES type stuff, and they're going to move to something like elliptic curve cryptography, which apparently is stronger and harder to crack. But that's pretty much all I know. All I know about the future of where it's going.
Well, elliptic curve is just a method within something, but there are flaws in elliptic curve, just like there are flaws in others. But I know a lot of people get their undies in a bunch over where quantum computing's going to fall in all this. Been a lot of articles lately about the Chinese and the Russians are grabbing everything they can, and then when quantum computing is viable, they're going to decrypt it. Well, good for them. I mean, the latest estimates are 15 to 20 years before quantum computers are able to decrypt AES. So, I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, they'll have a lot of data, and yeah, they'll be able to decrypt it, but is it going to be worth anything in 20 years?
Yeah.
So I don't worry about quantum computing. Do we have to worry about it? I'm sure there are people that need to worry about it, but for the average person running a business, as long as you're using AES 128, 192, or 256, and you're using TLS 1.2 or greater, not a problem. I mean, that's what the council means by strong cryptography. Anything else isn't considered strong. Even triple DES 168 is technically unbreakable at the moment. However, that's all dependent on key length.
Right.
And if the key length isn't good enough, then triple DES 168 is a dead duck.
Right.
So you really, unless you have no other choice, you really should not be using triple DES at all.
Yeah.
But I know there are a lot of devices out there. You don't get a choice. So,
well, that's what most of the PTS devices use, isn't it?
Yeah, they come out shipped with that. What I'm noticing though is if you go back, like say stuff from PTS version 3 through 4 and through 5 now, where the stuff that's running through 5 is expiring in April 2026. And what you'll notice is with most of those devices in those last rounds that have gone through PTS 3, 4, 5, they do triple DES, but they also are quite capable of AES as well. And so I always tell my clients, let's be working with our transaction processor, and let's see if we can make sure that we're using AES for this. Duck putt for the keys management stuff, that's fine, but the duck putt doesn't scare me. But and triple DES doesn't scare me yet. But it's close, baby. It's getting close. I'm getting scared. Elvis is getting fearful of triple DES.
There's a Roger Grimes has a really good book called Quantum Apocalypse, where he goes through the various issues around quantum crypto, quantum computing, what algorithms are at risk. So anyone interested in the topic, that definitely is should be their go-to book. But it's Google is making massive inroads, but the day will come, whether it's 5 years or 15 years, where RSA is going to be able to be broken in seconds. So that's why a lot of companies are using quantum crypto to hedge their bets. But clearly, from a PCI perspective, quantum crypto is overkill at that point.
There's obvious military applications for that.
Yeah.
Too.
So
Right, exactly.
one thing in the news a lot is, a magic cart, which is a type of fraud where transaction data is intercepted during the checkout process. Also, sort of a digital version of skimming, and that is turning into be a big issue. I know, Dave, you were doing some stuff with threat analytics, and
Right.
that was one of the questions you got. So what should a merchant, what should a service provider do to protect themselves against magic card type of skimming threats?
So one of the things that hasn't been looked at very closely until recently, and this has to do with e-commerce, I'm hoping this is going in the right direction to answer the question. Because if they're talking about digital skimming, they're talking about e-commerce, correct? Would you say?
Yeah, clearly,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. So one of the areas that's been overlooked for quite some time now is what's known as the client-side web browser vulnerabilities and client-side based attacks, and things like MageCart and some of the other skimmers and things like that are essentially designed to take advantage of certain aspects of the client browser session. So you have to keep in mind now, most e-commerce sites now, when you log into your account or to a site or get ready to try to pay for something, those web pages that are being served up to you are dynamically generated. And a lot of that, what you get to see and what gets presented to you is based upon your user experience and the fact that it's been recorded on the client-side browser. And how that is done is that on that web page, there are various tag managers like Google Tag Manager and Adobe Tag Manager, and there's some other scripts that get loaded by the developer of the website at the direction of the business and marketing people. And those scripts essentially collect actual user telemetry, behavior, mouse position, all that kind of stuff. They can actually even record sessions. Some of those scripts are actually launched from the side, if you will, and some of the scripts are actually legitimate scripts to some extent to support the e-commerce experience, but a lot of the scripts get delivered from third-party sources. For example, if Google Analytics connects and captures some information, they're going to send that information off to other third-party sources that are going to do something with that. And the next thing you know, you have all of these various entities that are outside the control of traditional e-commerce vulnerability and penetration testing techniques, because all of that stuff focuses on the server side. They don't really look at what goes on in the browser because of the fact that there's so many different browser versions and there's so many different ways to configure it. And the user experience is so dynamic based upon all this intelligence they are gathering. Now, the downside of this is that some of that intelligence they gather, like, for example, they could do a screen scrape or a session recording and actually capture cardholder data that's being presented into the e-commerce webpage. In addition to that, they can actually capture authentication credentials if they're recording the session as well. So fortunately, there is a company now that we partner with. They're called Feroot, F-E-R-O-O-T, and they have a technology solution that is kind of like a headless browser in the middle between the client web browser and the server. And it actually can pick up all of those scripts. It can actually record and trace back to where those third-party sources are. And it even has a nice little international map, can show you that, if you'll see third-party sources injecting code into your experience from, Russia or China or Brazil. That's probably bad. But this technology is a software as a service technology, and it not only can detect and record the actual scripts, but it can also alert upon any of this stuff. And then they have another aspect of this technology called PageGuard, which is almost like a firewall, if you will. We'll actually both block and alert any of those side-loaded codes and those attacks. So that's that. My recommendation is to look up or check out Feroot, F-E-R-O-O-T. And if you have any questions with respect to, there's actually a white paper I helped publish with them. I'll see if I can get it to Coop there, and we can make it available to the people on this call. And it goes into detail about all of the potential downfalls and vulnerabilities associated with side-loaded code. I kind of like to refer to it as the Mariana Trench of attack surfaces, because up until recently, most people didn't see what was going on inside the client-side web browser, just like it wasn't until 1960 that we actually got to the bottom of the Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean with a manned submersible to look around. So a lot of wild stuff going on there. And by the way, that is also the domain of the client-side web browser is also the domain of malware vendors and also social media. They're doing a lot of really crazy and not so nice stuff onto the client-side browser. So the only way you can detect it is you got to be able to see it. And this stuff will help you do that. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, cool, thanks. Here's a question on the chat, from Omar. Obviously, a Dream Team webinar would not be complete without discussion with call centers. But he's saying, any recommendations on call centers? We have secured everything with the card entry functionality, tokenization, etc. But how do you get around people calling in and providing credit card numbers? Smartphones and phones are encrypted, but apparently that doesn't stop our QSA in classifying that environment, as the CDE.
Well, and that was the whole point of the information supplement on telephony transactions. I worked on that, 3 years ago now. When someone speaks any cardholder data, so cardholder name, PAN, CVV, expiration date, that's all cardholder data. Sadly, with the advent of voice over IP, the council now views that data being transmitted, even though it's audio, it's still audio transmitted over a network. And so as a result, they consider that as in scope for PCI compliance. Now, you can encrypt that traffic, but the traffic still is unencrypted at the endpoints. So the telephone, the call manager, they're all devices, they're servers dealing in cardholder data. Just no different than point of sale, the POI, any servers that would come in contact with cardholder data in the clear, it's same thing. We did want to ask the card brands at the time to clarify that. Visa and MasterCard wouldn't give us the time of day to discuss those risks. So the information supplement exists as it does, which says, we don't care, it's in scope and it is part of the CDE. So the call manager, et cetera, that's all part of the CDE. Now, there are vendors out there that will take in the cardholder data. The problem with those solutions is, where are they, or where in the data flow do they occur? Just because an operator can't hear the tones does not mean that keeps you out of scope. Because if the call is in your call manager, you transfer that call to one of your solutions, and that call comes back to the operator after data entry. Yes, the operator can't hear it, but the call manager did. And so the call manager is still in scope, and therefore everything connected to the call manager is in scope. It's still a connected to system. And so soft phones, regular telephones, any device that's connected is now in scope. Sadly, because of unified communication solutions, now all of your chat functions, so if you're using Jabber, for example, or similar solutions, that's all in scope as well, whether they're taking credit cards or not. And so this frustrates, I know, a lot of people, but at the end of the day, those are the rules. There's a great information supplement out there that describes all this, explains it all. But the problem most people have is they do not understand how their telephony solution works. I've run into a lot of people. The old rules of how a PBX works still apply today, even though it's voice over IP, yet most people managing telephony solutions don't understand how that works. And if you flow it out with a data flow diagram, you'll see very clearly where you are. Thank you, Elvis.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to say, there is a way to mitigate it with some solutions. There are some solutions that actually have a piece of code, or let's call it what it is, an endpoint agent or whatever, that goes directly onto a PC, let's say, for lack of a better term, and then it actually controls the audio that goes out of that PC into the person's ears and controls the voice. And what's nice about it is that piece of software does all of the encrypting and decrypting and just sends it through a standard internet, actually in an HTTPS stream, or two or three of the ones I've seen. And then what you have is you have a service provider on the other end. And what happens is your calls are routed to that service provider, and then that service provider sends that purely encrypted stream. There's no call manager. There's nothing else on the merchant's end other than that agent, and you have to be on that box with that agent talking in that. And a lot of merchants don't like it because it marries them to certain headsets that service provider has picked that works with their encryption and all. So there are situations like that where you can mitigate the fact that nowhere in your environment will that data be decrypted. And so it's sort of an end-to-end solution for voice. But those are the only solutions, and they're far and few between. You have to make sure you pick one that really does that, because as soon as you've picked a solution that has you installing some type of a server or a call manager, like Jeff said, it's a tier 2 connected to device, and everything that's hooked to it just gets dragged into scope. There's just no other way around it.
So to answer
UFC is great.
Go ahead.
I think UFC is great. It tries to unify all of that communication. So from a communications and a collaborative perspective, it's great. From a PCI perspective, it's it's a nightmare.
Yeah, it is.
And companies just find that out when it's too late.
That's right. And we had a follow-up question to what I just said, and it's an excellent follow-up. And I know the individual that asked it, he's a very sharp individual. And what he has asked us is, wouldn't the PC that the software runs on be in scope? Absolutely. There's going to be a limited scope there. You're always going to want to do patching and vulnerability management, and make sure you have virus and malware protection. And so, right, you're always going to have to worry about that particular PC that call agent is using. And where it gets tough is when people are working at home. And this has been a huge, and I don't want to open that can of worms up, because that is a big, ugly can, more like a can of snakes. But the thing is, there's definitely a limited scope to that, because, or there is a scope function to that PC, because even though people will argue with you and say, well, they could sit in a public library with that PC and use their bandwidth and everything's great, but wouldn't you want to do at least industry best practices for that PC? Now, this is where QSAs are going to fight with you. Some QSAs are going to say, I don't care. And other QSAs are going to want full scope on that PC and all kinds of stuff. And my point is, I think we have to draw, it's almost like a demarcation point, right? So let's do the things that we would normally do to Windows PCs. Let's patch them. Let's make sure we have some type of endpoint protection, and let's make sure we control access. And as long as we're doing those things, then I think we're gonna answer that bill as far as, yes, that PC does have a scope.
Yeah. I mean, that sort of just leads into the next sort of the follow-up question then would be, meaning is, we do say 10 QSA, 10 different opinions, but with that, shouldn't it be more like 10 QSAs, maybe, 1.5 opinions? Because someone could go down the road, and if they had a not so aggressive QSA that was fine with that communication solution, then, year 8, they expect smooth sailing. The QSA goes hardball on them, and now they're they think they're going to be compliant, next month, and they're completely out of scope and completely out of compliance. So, I mean, this is not a QSA issue. This is true in, all fields. You could have two doctors look at the same X-ray and say something different. But, what could a company do to hedge their bet against,
Well,
different QSA?
You need to document it, Ben. I mean, this is where companies get into trouble with their assessments. They don't define the rules. Every organization is supposed to define what is a significant change. Yet I can count on one hand the number of companies that have that defined. And if it's not defined, I'm going to define it for you as your QSA, because I have to have a definition.
Mhm.
The same as periodic. Periodic does not equate to annual, even though most people do that. I get it. Periodic is supposed to be defined by your risk assessment. And, if you're not defining those terms, you're going to get 20 different opinions based on whatever QSA. So bringing it back to the discussion on VoIP, a lot of the problems we have around VoIP is most people don't know how VoIP works.
Mhm.
Telephony hasn't changed just because of VoIP.
Mhm.
What changed with VoIP is just the transmission protocol. The way the phone works is the way the phone has always worked. There's still tip and ring on a VoIP phone system. And for all the old telephony people, what tip and ring means.
And T1R1 and
Yeah.
E and M and CBS1 and CBS2 and
Yeah,
CS,
all this
the good
stuff,
wires.
right? All this stuff still exists. All that changed is the medium over which they use it.
That's right.
And-
Well, you just said something that was in Elvis's lifetime. So Elvis actually knows about all those wires.
Yeah.
So I mean, without that knowledge, people sit there and they get all balled up that the QSA is being mean. Well, I'm not being mean. I know how the thing works.
Mhm.
And because of that, I have to enforce the rules. A lot of QSAs do not understand telephony.
Mhm.
And as a result, they just turn a blind eye to it and go, beyond me, whatever you're doing must be fine.
Mhm.
And under version 4, I will let you know that's not going to fly anymore. So QSAs are going to be called on the carpet to enforce a lot of stuff that they were just letting slide in the past.
I mean, that's
Agreed.
that's something, the council should have been, more aggressive about, or is it just the
Well-
nature of the beast?
Well, the banks, the brands,
Mhm.
everybody. I mean, the council trained everyone. The council has told everyone. The council published the information supplement on telephony. So it's shame on us for not following through on it. But I can tell you, I've had fights with QSAs over telephony.
Mhm.
They just, and they walk away from you and go, well, I'm just not going to deal with it.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Next question we had. Thank you, Michelle. That was a good question you had. Takes a bit of just a quick intro. So the BIN, the bank identification number, is the initial sequence of 4 to 6 numbers that appear on your credit card to identify the issuing bank who gave you that card. Often, one thing, scam. There's a lot of scam calls from interest rate companies claiming to reduce debt, and you tell them, oh yeah, it's from Chase, and they've got the list of all the bins, and they try to do some social engineering. They'll say, oh, tell me the name of your credit card beginning with 4 or 4114. So with that, that the bin ties the issuer to all the cards it issues. So this question, Michelle had is that around bin discontinuation combined with tokenization and encryption. So with that, what would her question was, would card brands restrict this practice? Since it could lead to bin exhaustion, meaning the new approach.
Well, I think where she was headed, Ben, is they're using a specific bin. They have done tokenization. They are moving to a new bin, and that would be new tokenization, of course. How long are they obligated to maintain the old bin and the old data? And that's going to be up, I think, if we understand the question right, that's going to be up to their data retention policies and how long they have to keep it based on their banking relationships and other things. In theory, it could be as little as 90 days. It could be as much as 3 years, depending on what you're dealing with. So we would have to know a lot more about this situation to understand and truly be able to provide an answer. But it does lead to a good question about a follow-up on our 8-digit bins. We were talking about that before we came on the air, because that's a new thing that's coming up. Unfortunately, with 16-digit PANs, we're kind of stuck, because the 6 and 4 rule, 6 first, which is the bin that we're talking about, is still going to have to be enforced until we get to 19-digit PANs. Then you probably will see the council issue 8 and 4, or maybe even 8 and 6, who knows. I would prefer to see the lesser in 8 and 4, but that's just my opinion. I don't know what everybody else has to say about that.
I mean, what's to prevent, if they would in the future, say, 5 years down the road, want to have a 20 or a 25-digit PAN. What's to stop them from doing that? Obviously there have to be, huge re-engineering, applications, payment, etc. But, we're not wedded to a 16-digit PAN.
Well, no, and ISO actually says 19 digits is the maximum.
Yeah. Why
currently.
Is that?
Just because they're not issued doesn't mean they're not allowed.
Okay.
In some places, 19-digit PANs have been used.
Yeah.
But Michelle followed up with a clarification that the question is whether we need to tokenize historical data sitting in the archive of the discontinued bin. If we have everything properly tokenized with the new bin, yeah, you do. That old data still has to be protected.
Yeah, it does.
So
I went
now,
through with Visa once where they forced a client I had that does fraud modeling, and all of the data that this client had was, well, let's tell it like it is. They literally had every bloody bin there was between all of the card brands, and this is the exact question that came up, and this was actually several years ago. And Visa, MasterCard, and Amex came out and said, you absolutely need to. Of course, in that case, they were doing a strange type of indexing on encrypted bin, but let's call it what it is. Now it's referred to as a token. But the point is, it was a vault type technology similar to tokenization. But the point is, yes. But go ahead, Jeff. I just wanted to let people know.
No,
that's an old question. It's been around, and yes, you do have to keep that stuff.
Yeah, any historical data you have has to be protected, just like current data. Doesn't matter what it is.
Yep.
So if it's encrypted and it's using strong encryption, as we talked about earlier, you can leave it that way. That's fine. But if it's not protected in any way, yes, you're going to have to do something about it. My druthers would be to purge it if you could, but if you can't.
If you think about PADSS, we all know we're moving away from PADSS. It's now, I don't want to say null and void, but let's say we're moving into the security framework with PCI. But think about one of the first most important things that we did as PAQSAs and what we did under PADSS. If you recall, don't you remember with every one of these POS off-the-shelf solutions, there had to be a tool in there, and it had to be in the implementation guide, and it had to talked about getting rid of all historical data. Period. That was part of being compliant under PADSS.
Yeah.
And some vendors went to great lengths to either build that in or provide a very easy tool. And other vendors didn't do their job well. And I had gone out and saw a bunch of POSs sitting with old stuff from before they had put in that newer PADSS validated version of that POS. And they caught hell. The acquirers, when they found out this was going on, some of the acquirers, and I won't mention the one that in particular, actually contacted me directly when I was a QSA and said, you need to make sure these people are following that implementation guide 100% and getting rid of that historical data, period. So it's an old chestnut, I guess, as for the best way to describe
is there any legitimate reason to have old historical PANs?
Issuers are going to argue. Yeah, Jeff, go ahead. The issuers are going to argue with you every time about that.
There are some valid reasons. There are some legal reasons you have to maintain it. For example, just to trot out an old one, in France, they have to keep the transactions for, I believe it's 3 years. And they also are required to print the full PAN on the receipt, because under French law, and it's not just France, there are a couple other countries where this is true too, you're not allowed to mask the PAN on the receipt, because the receipt is the document that holds everyone legally accountable for the transaction. And if the PAN is masked, then there's no proof the transaction existed. I believe France finally changed that law, but for a long time, it had to exist. And so merchants in France were having to store transactions for 3 years in secure storage locations just because of the legal requirements. Now, that brings up a good point. This is one of those situations where the legal structure trumps PCI. So you were allowed to keep that and maintain it, but you were also required to properly secure it because you legally had to maintain it.
Yeah.
So you didn't get a buy on the requirements just because legally you had to keep it.
Yeah.
You still were on the hook if it got out in the free.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
I mean, the DSS itself, says, it is secondary to any specific legal or regulatory issues, but just because it does that, though, it's opening bigger cans of worms than obviating DSS requirements, because now you've got all this historical data. But I mean, aside from France and some limited scenarios, I mean, the thing is, besides, and, chargebacks, why would a company, want that? Or is this, or they're just too
Well, I
lazy to
mean,
delete it?
so this is a question that always came up on chargebacks, which is, any consumer has a 90-day right to dispute a charge. And I'd venture to say probably 95% of those disputes come at day 89.
Yep.
They finally realize they got to do something. And so the question always came up, how long should we keep those records around? And there are some people that say, well, we don't get a lot of chargebacks, we don't get a lot of disputes, so we're going to purge it at 90 days or 95 days. But most merchants are running about 120 these days, just because somebody technically can dispute a charge on day 90 with a postmarked letter. And if it takes 30 days to get to you or 15 days and you've purged it, you're on the hook for it.
Yeah, you're gonna eat it. Well, that's why most merchants now, if they're dealing with most of these point-to-point end-to-end solutions, they're not even keeping anything in-house, and they do all of their chargebacks through the transaction payment service provider that they have, their payment gateway, and good for them. And if you recall, when we first started doing chip and signature over here, the chargeback situation was insane for the merchants. They were getting these monstrous $20,000 chargebacks and all of that. I've heard very little about that lately, so that mess has settled down. I never did really figure out what was going on, but there were several lawsuits over it. There was a grocery store chain in Florida that sued, I believe, Visa, and there were several lawsuits with Walmart, Kroger, Visa. I'm probably not listing all the right companies, but there were these absolutely horrendous chargebacks based on once they had switched over to the EMV technology. And I never did really figure out, did any of you figure out what that was all about? Was it the bank that was messing up, or the merchant, or the payment brand network? I never did figure that mess out, and it just sort of, I'm not sure what fixed it, but it kind of went away. But historically, when we went to the chip and signature, my God, that was a huge. I had one client that had received hundreds of thousands in chargebacks from their transaction processor, and none of it made any sense. Weird stuff.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, it was a weird thing. It was one of those, PCI lore legend things, and I was getting asked almost daily, well, why is this happening? It didn't happen in Canada when they switched over, because I had clients that did business in Canada.
Well, but that was chip and pin.
Exactly. And I tried to explain that to them, that the rollout in the United States, in my opinion, was flawed from day one, doing that chip and signature stuff.
Oh,
and
definitely.
And the thing that kills me is it's just asking for replay attacks. And I guess, I don't know, I'm not king of the world yet. I'm just the king of rock and roll, baby. So I can't fix it. But, the thing is, this was a very real and kind of terrible situation. And I want to take that one big, long question we got from Bruce. After reading all of that, the answer is actually yes.
Well, and what I just wanted to add on, because I know Bruce. Great guy, by the way. But
question,
he points out a flaw in SAQA.
Oh, exactly, he does. We all know that flaw. That's all.
Jeff, you want to share with the audience what is that flaw?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff. Bruce, go ahead and share it. It's like we could have a whole dream team session.
Oh God, SAQ. So you need a little backstory on why SAQA exists. So back in the day, 15, 16 years ago now.
Yep.
There were vendors, third parties, promoting solutions that did redirects, iframes, and they were honestly marketing them as putting you totally out of scope for Visa and MasterCard, which at the time, how the rules for Visa and MasterCard were written, they did. Well, when the council came about, the brands decided to close that loophole, and they irritated the people, the vendors that were selling the solutions. And so long story short, we got SAQA, which
And
is
just, real quick, just for everyone who doesn't know, Saqa is for all of the cardholder data is fully outsourced. Everything is card not present.
So, and the key thing to remember though is that it doesn't stop. If you're doing a redirect or an iframe and somebody messes with your website and changes that redirect or iframe, that's not your processor's problem. That's not the redirect guy's problem. It's your problem. You're legally on the hook for that. And although you're PCI compliant, don't get me wrong, you're legally responsible for that. So this is why when people say, oh, I'm SAQA compliant, I just shake my head because they haven't patched their server in months. They haven't done anything, and they're a breach waiting to happen. But David, go ahead.
That's what happened to British Airways, and was it Ticketmaster? Yep. I mean, essentially somebody swapped out the redirect code. And initially, when I first heard about this stuff, the redirects, I always felt like that should put a system in scope, just like as an SAQA EP does, because the underlying server is serving up that code. And whether that code was written by a merchant developer or by a service provider who's processing, if that code gets messed with, you can get redirected to a site that looks just like the real thing, and you end up putting in your cardholder information. And the real challenges, I think, with some of the instances where this occurred, there was no real change management or review or change control review of the actual architecture for the e-commerce server that was serving it up. So it went undetected for a long time. So they just thought it was the legitimate code. So.
Well, and I have also been party to a couple of forensic investigations where the redirect got changed, but then passed it to the real redirect. So it was like a man in the middle attack where they were just copying the data and still letting the transaction go through. So the consumer sees the charge for the airline ticket or whatever they're buying. And then months later, all of a sudden their card's used at Best Buy to buy $50,000 worth of TVs, computers, and whatever the hell else they bought. And how did this happen?
Well, what about the guidance situation? Remember how for years and years, when it came to e-com, QSAs, we were begging the council, like, can you guys tell us, like, first they didn't accept the open scoping toolkit, which every damn QSA helped. If you're an old school QSA like us, if you weren't using the open scoping toolkit, then you weren't a QSA. And then there was no guidance that came out for e-com. But then if you remember, Visa Europe came out with their guidance. And if you now look at what the council came out with the e-com supplement, which is a great document, by the way, don't get me wrong, but it looks suspiciously like an expanded version of what Visa Europe came out with.
Well, they lifted the table straight out of Visa Europe.
They lifted it right out, which, hey, I get it. Don't reinvent the wheel, right? But the thing that kills me is this is such a I think at every community meeting, when we used to have real meetings and not virtual meetings, we'd be out in the lobby of whatever hotel in whatever city in whatever state or whatever country. And undoubtedly, at least 5 or 6 of us QSAs would gather together. And this always comes up. The whole ecom / SAC / redirect / on and on and on. And I still see this. Correct me if I'm wrong. Colleagues, this is probably one of the grayest and most misunderstood areas in PCI, my personal opinion.
No, I think we're all in agreement that AEP should be the minimum, but thanks to those vendors way back in the dark ages, we're stuck with this crazy solution.
Benjamins, man. It's all about the Benjamins. It's all about the money, baby. It's all about the money, baby. It's the money. Elvis will tell you. It's about the money, baby.
So one quick follow-up on this thing about having scripts in the client-side web browser. I am of the firm opinion, and it's just my opinion, by the way, that there should be none of these scripts that for marketing, no tag managers, no nothing on a e-commerce page or a payment redirect page, because that stuff can be monkeyed with and manipulated with, and information could be recorded. And, I harken back to section 2.2 of the PCI DSS that you only load the functionality required to securely process transactions, essentially. And then all unnecessary scripts, all this, business intelligence stuff, this marketing stuff should be completely cleaned out of those 2 pages. You probably won't win the battle to clean them out entirely of the website, but I actually asked the PCI Council on whether or not they, supported that position, and they've dodged that for about 6 to 8 months now. So they don't even want to touch it.
We got a great comment about this, Dave. Did you see the comment we just got in the Q&A from an anonymous attendee? I'm sitting here reading it, listening to you, and I'm like, boy, Dave, are you texting him to make that comment?
No.
Because I'm like, okay, but I think it's a great comment, Ben. I would say it's worth a read or a paraphrase.
Yeah, I think there's still vendors who are doing that. A very widely used student loan service provider gives redirect link merchants that they can insert into their website to redirect students to submit their payments. Their literature often implies that you're fully PCI compliant if you use that redirect feature. Universities might have hundreds of these redirect links across multiple departments. And it's very difficult to convince them that all of the servers that host these are now in scope. And it's sort of think it's like pointing fingers.
Well,
they're saying, we're out of scope if we do the redirect, but that is clearly not the case.
They are in scope, but only to the point that SAQA makes them in scope.
Yeah.
And that's the huge flaw.
Yeah, that is the flaw. It's bad. It's bad. I have a client that you folks know really well. I guarantee you have used their services. They're worldwide client. And when it came time to set up the DMZ for payments to them for, let's say, their services, what we did is we sat down and me as their QSA and them as a very wonderful, intelligent client, and we decided these requirements in SAC are not cutting it. And so we built out a DMZ. Now I know on the back end that they were using a provider that's also very well known that PayPal owns now, but that DMZ that we built out has every stinking requirement applied to it that can. And if anybody messes with that code and their payment pages, we are going to know about it, because we looked at the thing and we took the risk assessment, and just like you guys have been talking about, and just like we're saying, SAC just does not go far enough.
Yeah.
But I can't change the rules. So when a client says to me, well, that's really all I have to do, it's like, yeah, that's all you.
Well, you can always go above and beyond,
Of course.
Yeah.
It's like I always talk about the scale, and I know we're running out of time, but my last thing, with Elvis, you got to have a scale with the karate chops. But it's so true. Think about this scale from 0 to 10, where 10 is the most secure thing you could ever have, and 0 is nothing. PCI is about a 1. And so I always try to tell people it's compliance. It's minimum. It's not even up near 2. It's about a 1 on that scale, folks. So do you just want to do the 1? Right.
It's the proverbial floor, not the ceiling.
Exactly. It's the floor, not the ceiling.
Yeah.
So let's
But,
aim high.
yeah, you want to for
stop
many
thinking.
it's the floor in the Heartbreak Hotel.
The floor in the
That's
Heartbreak
fine.
Hotel. TCB, baby.
So,
Know it.
so once again, coming up on the hour, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, TrustedSec, for hosting this.
Have a happy holiday.
Happy holidays, and
Yep.
hopefully by the time we hit 2022, we'll be able to finally speak about PCI version 4. But don't hold your breath. But once again, thank you everyone, and hopefully, I think we got all the questions. But feel free to email us PCIDreamTeam@gmail, and we'll follow up with you that way. Once again, thanks again. Thanks, Coop. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Guru, and see you next time. So,
Adios.
Adios, everybody.